What's up guys, it's Craziness of the Internet here, and we are back again with another video in EVE Online. Today we'll be going over destroyers from the Gallente faction and some of the most basic PvP builds and things that you should know when you are going out and engaging and hunting the enemy and looking for player versus player fights in EVE Online and low-sec and faction warfare space. And noting to yourself that you always do have to choose your fights correctly. There is pros and cons when it comes to each ship that you use. These designs that I'm going to show you guys right now are alpha and omega friendly, but remember EVE Online is a friend game, so it's best to play as a group, not as a solo pilot. It is possible to play solo, but remember, best ship is always friendship. Now here in this video, we're going to be going over the Gallente Supporting Destroyers and understanding to ourselves that Gallente is also a hyperclass faction and that they utilize best in armor and structure tank, and their main design should always be around structure tank. Now the other thing that you do need to note here when it does come to all Gallente vessels is that they are one of the main design vessels in the game that will utilize drones over anything else. There is certain ships in other factions that will also use this style of a gameplay in certain ships, but this style of a gameplay is suited and designed specifically for the Gallente faction. Now the second thing that you do want to note here when you are using this faction and their style of ships in combat is that the Gallente faction is the highest DPS output faction in the game when it comes to their blaster weapon systems. But in order to do this, you do sadly have to get up close and personal in EVE Online as close as you possibly can to get the best performance of your class's vessel when utilizing the blaster weapon system. Now when choosing to use any ship in EVE Online, there is pros and cons when doing so. So because we do get the chance to dish out the highest DPS output in the game, we sadly are forced to get up close and personal, which in the end could mean the downfall for your ship and your design. But there is one benefit when using blasters and choosing the Gallente faction, and that is the ability to use the drones. Now it doesn't matter which ship you choose to use in the Gallente faction as long as they have the capability of using the drones. What this means is that when you are under any type of pressure, half of your DPS most of the time, if it's a specific design or build that's specifically designed to boost only the drone DPS output and has no ability to use blasters or weapon systems, then this utility trick would not apply to you. But if you are utilizing both the guns and the drones together, then always half of your DPS will always apply to your enemy. And noting to yourself that that will only take effect when you make sure that you get first strike on your enemy, or make sure that you have launched your drones into aggressive attack mode on your opponent before any E-War or any other tactics come into play. Now one of the first ships and builds that we will be going over with the Gallente destroyers is the Algos. Now this ship right here, you guys, is one of the utility based ships in the Gallente faction that will let you utilize drones and will let you use it in many different fashions and many different build designs that we'll get into in a moment. But first, here in this build design, I want you guys to understand the bonus capabilities of the Gallente as you skill yourself up. And if you look over right here, you can see that at max skill level you do get 50% bonus to the hit points and damage, and that you do get 50% bonus to tracking speed. Now when it does come to blasters, tracking speed is one of the most important factors, as when it comes to any gun system, especially when it does come to the Minmatar, the Gallente, and the Amarr gun-based weapon systems, sometimes they will struggle when it does come to velocity versus tracking. So having that 50% bonus to your tracking speed is incredibly helpful on tracking those smaller targets or those ones trying to get under your weapon systems. And if you look down here, we can also see that you do get a 25% bonus to your drone max velocity. Now there is another destroyer that does this, and that is in the Amarr faction. Now the nice thing of having this bonus to your ship and especially to your drones is that you do get the ability to chase off high velocity speed kiters, and you do have the chance to chase down any tackler that is utilizing mainly all of their modules towards speed, as you do get that chance with your warrior 2s to be able to go around 6,000 to 8,000 meters a second depending on your modules. Having that ability to have that speed is a good defense against all of those kiters and scram kiters and ones that do want to try to lock you down from afar. Now, in the first build right here that we are going to go over, this is an armor brawling build. Now, we are going to use the fastest attacking weapon systems from the gun-based weapon systems of the Gallente faction, and that is the light electron blasters. So you can see that I do have 5 of them up here in my high slots, and to make sure that I can always keep at least 3 of them running, I do have a small ghoul compact energy Nosferatu. If we do look at our mid slots right here, we can see that we have reduced some of our CPU need and power grid output need with our 1MNY-S8 compact afterburner. Now, if you do have the skills to put in a Tech 2 afterburner, then make sure you do so. And if you do look over here in the other 2 mid slots, we do have an enduring warp scrambler and an enduring stasis webifier. This is to reduce the CPU output need so that we can apply more CPU into our drone damage amplifier here in our low slot. And because when you do use armor based ships in general, they are usually pretty CPU and especially power grid heavy, only when you are trying to squeeze on a 400 plate. And lastly, in our final low slot, we do have our damage control too, and that does help us when we are trying to sustain in those struggling moments with those barrages, because you guys, a damage control 2 does help you out against critical hits. Now, over here in our rig slots, we are using small Trimark armor pump 2s. This is going to give us a huge boost to our armor HP amount. Now, I do want you guys to note and to take this into account that when you are using the small Trimark armor pumps or are using shield based ones in general, a lot of the things when it comes to HP in EVE Online does cost a little more, because you guys, the game is based around fleet to fleet combat or player to player engagement in small gang format. 1v1ing and solo and small gang are rare factors of the game, but do get intriguingly fun at times. Now, to understand what I mean by that is when you do use some of these other modules, they do become super expensive when you are using Tech 2 format, because it becomes super hard to break any HP armor builds or any shield HP builds when you do have the power of an ally using logistics behind them. This is why they sometimes are more expensive. So if you are looking for the exact same build but do want it to cost significantly less, then you would exchange these small Trimark armor pump 2s to small Trimark armor pump 1s, lowering the cost of the destroyer by at least 15 to 20 million. Now, if we do simulate this build right here, you guys, you can see that we do have a heavy 4212 HP in the armor build, and by using the utility abilities of the Gallente faction, by using the drones and allowing yourself to always be able to apply half or more of your DPS depending on your build, you can see that over here we have 199.6 DPS. Now, this will change depending on your drones that you are using and the skills that you have applied to your character, but all in all, being able to apply at least 200 plus DPS to destroyers or frigates non-stop is super powerful. If we look at the gun weapons here, you guys, when we do put on full void and we heat our racks, you can see that we are rocking almost 450 DPS. Now, you do have to be up close and personal within 3,000 meters, aka 3 kilometers of your target, in order to be able to apply your full DPS output. This is why the webifier is needed in this style of a build. But you can see that when we do info the gun weapon system right here, that its rate of fire with the electron blasters is 1.47 seconds, depending also on your current skill rate. But you can see here that with my current set of skills that it is 1.5 seconds per volley. Now, the neutron blasters usually are 2 to 2.2 seconds, so you can see that we will get around 1.5 more volleys in a double concession. And the one final main bonus that the Gallente faction has is that its main HP or survivability function is structure tank. So by using always a damage control 2 on your ship designs, you can see that over here we do get a 60% flatline resistance across the board, and that most Gallente vessels do have a pretty sturdy structure tank, so it is best to use it as an excess survivability by applying that damage control too. And always noting to yourself, you guys, that if you are a newer style player in EVE Online, that all of these builds are alpha and omega friendly, and that you can see the alpha builds on the left of your screen right here. And that if you are a speed style player, then you can change a few modules around and always run your systems like this so that you are able to apply your micro warp drive engine. Okay, so now that you guys understand the HP Armor Brawler from the Gallente faction, let's get into the next build now. Alright, the next build that we are going to go over here is a high DPS shield brawling build. Now this is for all those shield style players out there. This build will allow you to sustain in moments where you do need it, as its only true weakness is EM, as it is pretty neutral across the board and it is just a basic buffing ship. Now I do want you guys to take note that all destroyers in the game are not designed to 1v1 themselves. They are meant to go around and hunt and destroy frigates, hence the word destroyer. They are supportive gunboats for cruisers, and they are meant to shoot down anything that gets up close to the bigger ships and meant to take down anything that is tackling a bigger ally. So once you understand that, you can see that naturally it does have a higher base rate than frigates, usually around 3 times as much base HP across the board, and without even adding modules. So this one right here does utilize an FS9 medium shield extender. Now you do have to use this one because you do have to reduce the CPU need from the modules for this build on your ship. Now do remember that you should have high engineering skills, or at least level 4 or 5 when trying to get this build. Otherwise you may have to reduce things such as the warp scrambler or the 1MN afterburner. May even have to reduce one of the drone damage amplifier 2s to give yourself a little bit more CPU. But whatever you need to do in order to pull off the build is okay, because in the end this build is designed for high amounts of DPS, and we are pushing the brawling factor of the Gallente faction to the limits with the style of a utility based destroyer in this build. Now we still are using the 50% small hybrid turret tracking bonus that you do get at max skill, combining that with the fastest firing base weapon systems from the Gallente faction, which is the light electron blaster 2s, and you can see that I do have 5 of them up there. Now we are using the Tech 2 afterburner and the Tech 2 scram because we do want to reach out as far as possible, but because we are going for just a base survivability and we are using our DPS output to try to outmatch our opponents and the small frigate gangs before they are able to kill us, or at least destroy as many of them before they do take us down, we do just have an IFFA compact damage control. And also down here in the low slots, we are trying to get as much DPS out of our drones as we can, so we have used 2 drone damage amplifier 2s. Now remember you guys, when you do use 3 or more of the same things in EVE Online, it does start taking a massive reduction hit. So 2 is okay, 3 is iffy, 4 is a no-no, so always do take that into account. Now in the rig slots, you guys, I am also pushing towards my attack speed by using a small hybrid burst aerator 2 that will add more attack speed to my light electron blasters, which also fire extremely fast. Now what I want you guys to see is that I am using small thermal shield reinforcers. That gives me a decent base of thermal resistance across the board, allowing me to be only sustainable in neutral format to EM damage. Now when we do simulate this build, you can see that with the drones and the 2 damage amplifiers that we are rocking 235.1 DPS. Now that is a high amount of DPS because you guys have to remind yourself that you are specifically trying to destroy frigates. Now anything over the 210 mark does pressurize any frigate almost to the max of its capabilities, unless it's a Navy one, then it does have a little bit of a buff bonus. So because we are relying heavily on our prey and spray, we do see that when we add our void over here into our gun slots, that we do have a high 483.1 DPS, and if we do overheat the rack, you can see that it is a high amount, which is 520.3 DPS. Now if you do have the support of any of your friends, especially when they are on the field with you, then this ship becomes super powerful and super viable in the hands of any high DPS player. And you guys can also see right here that by adding these 2 small thermal shield reinforcer ones, that you do get a base of 63% resist into your thermal. Now your shield base is naturally resistance highly against explosive. Secondary is kinetic, so by doing this I now have nullified my resistance to 3 base damage types, making a few above average and the rest par and neutral. Now the weakness to the ship and design and all shield based ships in general is EM. As you can see, it does only have 10% EM resistance, so do take that into consideration when you are flying this ship and this type of build, that you do have to choose and make sure that EM should be your final engagements. And as always, you guys, if you are an alpha player or a newer player to the game, that all of these builds are friendly towards you, and that in the game itself 2 alpha players can take on 1 omega player. So here on the left of the screen you can see the alpha and new player friendly builds right now. And always to all those speed players out there that do love the micro warp drive engine, as it is an asset in the game and will win you a lot of fights a lot of the time, you can use this build right here. Okay, so now that you guys are understanding the basics of utility based ships in EVE Online and how you can use them in many different fashions, let's get into the next build now. Okay, you guys, in this next build right here we are using a full structure tank style brawler. Now this style of a ship right here, you guys, does stay true to the Gallente faction style of a brawler, up close, in your face and personal, but instead of using high attack speed close range weapons, we are using higher DPS based gun systems. These are the light ion blaster 2s, and I also do have 5 of them here in my high slots. Now we do have a 1MN afterburner 2 and a warp scrambler 2 to get that 11-kilometer range when we are overheated, followed by our enduring stasis webifier. Now you guys do remember that in all brawling vessels you do always, especially when using blaster based gun systems, you do want to have an enduring stasis webifier when you can, as this will help your drones apply almost to their maximum DPS and will help your guns apply also heavily as well. Now if we do simulate this build right here, you guys, and we throw in the void and we overheat the rack, you can see that we do have 459.3 DPS, which is a high sustained amount. Now the bonus to this design versus the armor design is you can see that by using full structure tank, not armor HP, that you do not get the mass penalty, which does heavily reduce your speed output, and you are able to add a drone damage amplifier 2 down there in the low slot. And when you do look at the rigs here, you can see that we do have 3 small traversal bulkhead 2s on here. Now using all small traversal bulkhead 2s will allow you to have just as much HP as a heavy armor based style of a ship, because Gallente does have heavy structure based style HP. And do remind yourselves that when you are using any style of a brawling ship in EVE Online, especially Gallente faction ones in general, that you always have to remain highly aggressive and try to apply as much DPS as you can. And never forgetting that if you are a new player to EVE Online, that you can find the alpha and new player friendly builds on the left right now. And for all the micro warp drive ram scram players, you can also use this style of a build right here. Now that you guys have seen 3 of the most basic Algos utility based PvP ship designs that you should be using in EVE Online, why this is a utility based ship is because you can do builds like this, which I'm going to show you right now. Now for the final Algos build here, we are going to show you guys that by using any of the utility based ships in EVE Online for any of the factions, that they can be used in many different ways. So you see right here that we are staying true to the Gallente faction style of gameplay, which is heavy in your face and heavy structure tank play, with also utilizing when it needs the power of the drones. So by sticking to this gameplay, you can see that we are also maneuvering ourselves to be able to power down any of the vessels that do heavily rely on capacitor, with our ability to use 4 small gremlin compact energy neutralizers. And when they do have us burned out completely with our cap, if we are under any pressure by the enemy, we can use our 2 small ghoul compact energy Nosferatus before we use our small capacitor booster 2. That way we are able to use every once in a while an energy neutralizer, even under pressure. So in our low slots, we are trying to get as much damage as we can out of our drones because we do not have any other primary way of getting DPS. We're going to make drones our primary instead of our secondary, which it normally is. And we have buffed it with our ability to have bleed effects with using a small ancillary armor repairer by giving us those moments of longevity when needed. Now if I do simulate this ship right here, you can see that if we are under pressure of a small frigate gang, that we do press over the minimum 140 DPS that should be needed, and we are able to crack the 180 mark, which does pressure ancillary reppers. Now in this format, you are able to pin down and neutralize 2 of your opponents if you were in a 3v1 format, if they needed capacitor and were in your range, and then you could go head to head with the 3rd target, but this would place your build under the max pressure. Remember you guys, in EVE Online, there is no best ship or best build, that every single ship in the game is situational, and that you should be utilizing your builds and your ships specifically for their situations. As in EVE Online, truly the best ship is always friendship. Alright, so now that you guys understand that the Algos can be played in many different ways and many different playstyles in EVE Online, as this is the role of a utility-based ship, I hope that you guys do take these builds and do find yourselves out there on the battlefield, not afraid to engage your brethren, and reminding yourself that this is a PvP based sandbox and that engaging one another in PvP should be your main goal. Okay, so now we're going to get into the heavy gunboats for the Gallente faction. Now when it does come to gun based ships in general, you do have to remember that each faction will utilize their gun vessel in a different format, meaning that some of them will be utility based gun formats, or some of them will be straight DPS, or some of them will be hold your enemies at bay. In the end, you should always remind yourself that these are destroyers and that their main role is to support cruisers by not letting them get pinned down by smaller targets, or to help lay down heavy firepower and destroy frigates. That's their main core design, is why they're called destroyers, hence they're supposed to roll around and destroy and hunt frigates. Once you guys do understand that, you do realize that they are a supporting vessel, that yes, you can go around and get good fights in them, but they aren't designed to 1v1 themselves. They are designed to bring in some DPS needed for those small little groups or small gangs, so that you can break those bigger targets. As remember you guys, they are 8 based gun weapon systems at most of the time, so by using a destroyer in your small frigate gangs, and as an example, the frigates that you are using have 2 to 3 weapon systems on them, then you can see that by bringing 1 destroyer, you do bring the equivalence of 2 or 3 frigates into your squadron, so that in itself is pretty powerful. So once you do understand things like that, you can see that the first build we are using here is a kiting style build. Now this thing is super fast, and it is able to track super fast targets, as well as back in the day, you guys, I was able to lock down and erase sweeples with this ship design. As you can see right here in the rig slots, I am using a tracking enhanced rig. Also in my low slots, I do have a tracking enhancer too, because the railguns versus velocity do have a hard time tracking targets at certain moments. But here is the catch, is when they do get further away, around 23 to 35 kilometers, you can track them extremely well with a few tracking enhancement buffs by getting those critical hits on them if you are positioned correctly. Once I did figure out this little trick, I was able to lock down and destroy heavy amounts of T3 destroyers back when they were super popular. But remember you guys, whether you use a Tech 2 ship or a Tech 3 ship, in the end they still are the class of what that ship vessel is. They will just have some more powerful output. So once you understand that the tracking is what we're going for here, we also do have 8 125mm railgun 2s on here, and we are using a warp disruptor too, because we do need to overheat that to get that 29 to 30 kilometers when needed. And never forgetting you guys that you are a supporting vessel, that yes, you can go in and tackle things, but your main goal here should be to laying down as much firepower as possible before you go down, or take as many of them down with you. And to make sure that we can squeeze all of this on, we are using a processor overclocking unit in our rig slot. We also do have some cap regen bonus. If we do simulate the build right here, you can see that it isn't too many things impressive, as it is just a basic support kiting vessel in a destroyer format. We do have incredible tracking with this ship when it does come to the railgun systems, which you guys will feel when you do fly around using this build design. If we look over at our capacitor timer amount, it is a solid 4 minutes and 10 seconds. So you do know pretty much by using that capacitor rig that you do kind of make your ship stable, as if you were to pulse your micro warp drive engine, you pretty much are regenning your capacitor, making the ship design stable. Now that you guys understand how the kiting supporting destroyer for the Gallente faction works, let's get into the next build now. The next build that we are going to take a look at here is a high DPS brawling build relying on the base ideals of the Gallente faction. This is a high DPS full structure tank design, and it does allow you to add to the bonus of the base structure hit point amount of the ship's basic stats by using 3 traversal bulkhead 2s here and increasing it as much as we can, but always remembering that we are a supportive base gun vessel and that we are trying to get as much DPS out of this build design as we can. So we are using 8 light neutron blaster 2s, and we do in our low slot combine that with a magnetic field stabilizer 2 as well. Combining those two does allow us to get a chance at critical hits when we do get that smashing moment, and being able to use that damage control 2 combined with our small traversal bulkhead 2s does give us the ability to use a small ancillary armor repairer. This will be able to counter-react those lower based mid DPS frigates when you are landing on a small gang. Now when we do simulate this build, you can see right here in its structure tank HP that it does crack the 2000 hit point mark, which is more than enough sustain that you would need to take on 2 to 3 small frigates, especially if they were Tech 1 class as well. And always making sure that you can add on to that sustainability, you use the ancillary armor repairer. Now adding all of that extra HP to your structure tank does allow you to have bleed effects, making all of those rep charges viable. Now when we do add the void ammunition here and overheat the rack, you can see that we are rocking a solid 545 DPS, which is more than enough to start wrecking frigates and breaking any ancillary reppers, and any of those dual repping frigates that do rely on active tank are going to get instantly deleted as long as they do not have high base thermal resistance. Now that you guys do understand the difference between the utility-based destroyer and the gun-based destroyer, whichever one that you choose, always do remember that you should be supporting someone else, either supporting a frigate or supporting a cruiser. And I do hope to see you guys out on the battlefield in these builds, and if you did make it all the way to the end, please do like and subscribe. As always, I hope you guys are all staying safe out there. God bless, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.